It was the largest aircraft ever built by the Nazis, designed to cross the Atlantic and supply entire armies. But shortly after its maiden flight, it vanished under mysterious circumstances. Picture this. It's 1941. You're sitting in a design office in Hamburg. War is raging. The Americans are gearing up. The Atlantic? A hostile wall of water. And then someone says, "We're going to build an aircraft that can fly across the entire ocean." Taking off from water. Massive, heavy, unstoppable. That must have been the kind of atmosphere when Blohm and Voss began work on the BV-238. And if you're thinking, wait a second, Blohm and Voss, aren't they the shipbuilders? You're absolutely right. Originally a shipyard, masters of submarines and naval vessels. Aircraft? Totally uncharted waters for them. But war leaves no room for hesitation. The Luftwaffe needed reach, payload, presence, and Blohm and Voss, backed by the Reich Aviation Ministry, got the green light to attempt something no one had dared before. A flying transport battleship. A flying boat, not just capable of takeoff, but meant to haul entire tank divisions across continents. The vision was crystal clear. An aircraft that floated like a ship but had wings as wide as those on a modern airliner. 2 decks. Space for crew, equipment, bombs, vehicles. Even a galley with a refrigerator was part of the plan. This machine wasn't just built to fly, it was meant to be a long-distance train in the sky. And what they ended up with? It shattered everything that had ever lifted off from the water. But how do you even begin to build something like this? Chief designer Richard Vogt and his team had to throw the rulebook out the window. The fuselage wasn't just a fuselage, it was a high-strength, ship-like hull, engineered to take off from open seas. The wings? So huge, a person could crawl through them during flight to service the engines. Still, despite all the technology, there was relentless pressure. Material shortages, constant bombing of Hamburg, forced labor on the shipyard grounds. Every meter of aluminum was a battle. Every day without sabotage, a victory. Meanwhile, plans for future prototypes were already underway. V2, V3, up to V, but only one would ever leave the ground. But before we dive into the fascinating technical details, from monstrous engines and retractable floats to top-secret long-range missions, a quick favor. If you enjoy this video, please subscribe to the channel. Over 88% of our viewers come back again and again without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference for us. Thanks so much. Now, let's take a look at how this flying giant actually performed. 60 meters of wingspan, 43 meters long, nearly 100 tons in weight. This wasn't just a flying boat, it was a floating runway. A leviathan made of aluminum. Not an aircraft. More like a force of nature, but how do you get something that massive into the air? With 6 liquid-cooled Daimler-Benz DB603G engines, each producing 1,900 horsepower. Spread across 2 wings so thick you could actually stand inside them. No joke during flight, engineers could walk through maintenance tunnels inside the wings to reach the engines. Altogether, those motors pumped out over 11,000 horsepower. And with all that power, you could lift nearly 100 tons from water into the sky smoothly, but with authority. The BV-238 wasn't built to be agile. It was a glider, a silent giant cruising through the clouds at around 300 kilometers per hour. Its top speed? About 350 kilometers per hour, not fast, but it wasn't meant to be. Its strength was endurance, a range of up to 7,000 kilometers, and it could take off and land on water. Sounds logical, right? But it was anything but simple, because trying to launch something this size from water brings one major issue: resistance. The solution? 2 side-mounted floats that could retract hydraulically. It became the first large seaplane that didn't bounce across waves on fixed supports. Imagine steering a 10-story building across the Atlantic. Pulleys alone wouldn't cut it. Hydraulic cylinders did the heavy lifting, but only where truly necessary. Everywhere else, direct connection between pilot and plane. Now, here's where things get really interesting. The flaps weren't just bolted on like in other aircraft of the time. No, the BV-238 had fully integrated flaps, which deployed smoothly and flush with the body. Not tacked on, but seamlessly designed. A true aerodynamic feat. That's the point. Everything about this flying boat was larger, heavier, slower, but smarter. Want to land safely, you better have working trim. Without it, the aircraft was nearly impossible to keep on course. Even seasoned test pilots had a hard time with that. For comparison, the legendary Hughes H-4 Hercules had a wider wingspan but flew only once, and barely. The Japanese Koenishi H-8K2 Emily was combat-proven but half the size. Even the predecessor, the BV-222 Viking, felt like a well-loaded rowboat next to the 238. The BV-238 was, without exaggeration, the most ambitious flying boat project of World War II, maybe even in all aviation history. But it was never meant to stand alone. Behind the factory gates at Blohm and Voss, they were already thinking bigger. Okay, before we plunge into the full story, let's take a pit stop in the details. Because the BV-238 had a few hidden tricks up its sleeve, features no one would expect on something this huge. Quiet tech, but seriously clever. First, the cockpit windows. Not just glass slapped in place, the panels were modular. Individual panes that could be removed separately. That way, no nighttime reflections. And if visibility failed, pop it out, slide in a new one, keep flying. Right beside it, a manually guided sliding window for the pilot. Sounds simple, but on an aircraft this massive, practically absurd. You could open it to get fresh air, peek outside, or, in a real emergency, escape. By hand. No power required. Rugged, thoughtful, functional. The airflow system. Just below the cockpit windows on both sides were two small intakes. No jets, no turbofans, just neatly positioned air channels that ventilated the cabin using nothing but air pressure. Passive cooling, quiet, efficient, and now the real nerd stuff. At the nose were two measuring probes, but not your classic pitot tubes. Up top, an ultra-thin flow sensor. Below, a static pressure pipe, with no Venturi effect. This setup allowed accurate speed readings even when the aircraft skimmed just above unstable, low-altitude air over water. In short, high-tech before the term even existed. And finally, the nose access. Many think there was a ramp. Not quite. The nose could swing open like a crocodile jaw, upward or sideways. Behind it, direct access to the lower deck. Perfect for long cargo pipes, fuel tanks, maybe even a small vehicle. And above that, the crew cabin, two full levels. An aircraft with a split-level design. Looking at all this, you realize the BV-238 wasn't just a brute slab of metal and fuel. It was a masterpiece of design with solutions decades ahead of their time. Many of these ideas would reappear only much later, in cargo planes, in military airlifters, even in today's business jets. But back in the 1940s, it was simply too advanced. The BV-238, as we know it, was enormous. But that was only the beginning, because in the Blohm and Voss drafting rooms, ideas were forming that would have made even this behemoth look small. It was as if they had built a flying colossus, and then said, let's build 7 of them. V1 through V, each one with slightly different capabilities. New engines, more range, different roles. The V2 was set to get more powerful engines and had its fuselage well underway. The V3 planned to fly with new BMW power plants. The V4, even heavier, even larger, over 104 tons takeoff weight. That was more than any other aircraft of its time had ever lifted. And it was all documented with serial numbers, factory specs, scale drawings, side views. The original plans, some of which survive, show a level of planning so detailed, it borders on obsession for a project that never made it past V1. And they didn't just draft the airframe, they mapped out interior layouts, seating, loading zones, emergency exits, stretchers, even a mezzanine deck for vehicle transport. One version of the BV-238 could have carried up to 300 soldiers. A center aisle and side benches like a flying superbus. That was one configuration. The BV-238 was built to make history, but sometimes history writes its own script. And for all its presence, all its ambition, it never made it into service, but wait, it did fly, and what a flight it was. On March 11, 1944, the BV-238V1 skimmed across the waters of the Elbe for the very first time. The takeoff, from Hamburg-Blankenese. The pilot, Helmut Weser-Rodig, one of Blohm and Voss's most seasoned test pilots. The flight, surprisingly uneventful. She lifted off, flew steady, and landed safely. After that, she was moved to the Schalsee, a remote, quiet lake, ideal for further water trials, and far from prying eyes, because what was being tested here was more than just an airplane. It was a symbol of grand ambition, or maybe a final flicker of hope, depending on who you ask. Military transport, long-range runs gear personnel to North Africa, Scandinavia, even as a mid-ocean supply base for submarines. A flying milk cow delivering diesel, spare parts, maybe even chocolate to U-boats far out in the Atlantic. And yes, a strategic bomber was once floated as an idea. Supposedly, it could carry 6 2,400-kilogram bombs, but that idea never got off the ground. The BV-238 was a product of megalomania, but also proof of technical audacity. An aircraft that in peacetime might have done more good than any wartime mission ever could. And there's one more truth. Blohm and Voss, the company behind this machine, survived the war. Not with aircraft, but back with ships. Yet they had to face the darkness. Because many parts of the BV-238 were built with forced labor. People who were exploited so that this flying giant could take shape. Today, a memorial in Hamburg honors them, and the company paid compensation for years afterward. Late, but not too little, and there you have it. The story of the Blohm and Voss BV 238, an aircraft larger than most passenger jets today, built for a war it never reached, sunk before it could write its own chapter in history. If stories like this fascinate you, aircraft that almost defied possibility, feel free to subscribe to our channel. It costs nothing, but it helps us enormously. And while you're here, drop us a like or leave a comment. Do you think it could have changed the war's course, or was it a technical monument to desperation? Tell us below, we read every single comment.